Ladies and gentlemen, freedom is something most of us don't think about until it's gone. Imagine that in a single moment, your name is replaced by a number, your clothes by a uniform, and your choices by commands. This is the reality a prisoner faces in the first 24 hours of incarceration, a period that marks one of the most intense psychological transitions a human being can experience. The first hours begin with arrest and processing. Personal belongings are taken away. Phones, wallets, photographs, small objects that once defined identity. Each item placed into a bag represents a piece of freedom quietly stripped away. What remains is uncertainty. Next comes intake. Bright lights, long waits, and unfamiliar faces create an atmosphere of fear and confusion. Questions are asked, fingerprints taken, and rules explained, often rapidly and without comfort. The prisoner realizes that time no longer belongs to them. Every movement now requires permission. Then comes the cell. The door closes with a sound that echoes far beyond the walls. It is the sound of finality. In that moment, freedom becomes a memory, and confinement becomes real. For many, this is when anxiety, regret, and fear fully set in. Thoughts race. What will happen to me? Will I be safe? Will I see my family again? Night falls, but sleep does not come easily. The environment is loud, unfamiliar, and emotionally overwhelming. Some cry in silence. Others stare at the ceiling, confronting their choices and consequences for the first time without distraction. Yet within these 24 hours, something else may begin to form: reflection. Stripped of freedom, a prisoner is forced to face themselves. For some, this is the beginning of accountability. For others, it is the first spark of change. The first 24 hours of imprisonment are not just about punishment. They are about transformation, sudden, harsh, and unforgettable. They remind us that freedom is fragile, choices have weight, and confinement is not only physical, but deeply psychological. In everyday life, freedom exists quietly in the background. It is the ability to wake up when we choose, walk outside without permission, speak to loved ones freely, and make simple decisions without fear or restriction. These actions feel so normal that they rarely register as privileges. Freedom becomes routine, invisible, and taken for granted because it does not demand our attention. We only truly become aware of it when it disappears. For a prisoner, the moment freedom is taken away is sudden and overwhelming. Ordinary actions, using a phone, choosing what to wear, deciding where to sit, are no longer available. What once felt insignificant now feels priceless. The absence of freedom creates an intense awareness of how deeply it shaped daily life. Each lost choice highlights how freedom was woven into identity, dignity, and self-worth. In confinement, freedom is no longer an abstract idea. It becomes a powerful memory, replayed through regret, longing, and shock. The initial day of imprisonment delivers an intense mental impact that few experiences can compare to. The sudden transition from the outside world into a controlled and restrictive environment overwhelms the mind almost immediately. Familiar routines vanish, replaced by strict procedures, unfamiliar faces, and constant supervision. The brain struggles to process the speed at which life has changed, often leading to confusion, fear, and emotional numbness. Thoughts become scattered as the reality of confinement begins to settle in. The uncertainty of what lies ahead, court decisions, safety concerns, and separation from family, creates a heavy mental burden. During these first 24 hours, the prisoner is forced to confront a new identity shaped by loss of control and constant authority. This psychological shock does not fade quickly. It lingers, shaping behavior, emotions, and perception of the world as the individual begins to understand that life will no longer operate on their own terms. The moment personal belongings are taken away marks one of the most emotionally powerful stages of incarceration. Items such as a phone, wallet, keys, photographs, or even familiar clothing may seem ordinary, but they carry deep personal meaning. These objects connect individuals to their families, responsibilities, memories, and independence. When they're collected and sealed away, it feels as though parts of one's identity are being removed along with them. A phone no longer represents just communication, but the loss of contact with the outside world. Keys no longer symbolize access, but the reality that all doors are now controlled by someone else. Clothing once chosen freely is replaced by a uniform, reinforcing the loss of individuality. This process silently communicates that personal autonomy has ended. The absence of these belongings creates a sense of emptiness, reminding the prisoner that control, privacy, and self-expression have been stripped away in a matter of minutes. The intake process is often the first direct encounter a prisoner has with the full authority of the correctional system, and it can be deeply unsettling. From the moment intake begins, instructions are given quickly and without explanation, leaving little time to understand or adjust. Fingerprinting, photographs, searches, and medical checks happen in a rigid sequence, making the individual feel processed rather than acknowledged as a person. The environment is unfamiliar, filled with echoing sounds, harsh lighting, and constant movement, which heightens anxiety. Questions are asked that carry serious consequences, yet are delivered in an impersonal manner. During intake, choices disappear almost entirely. Where to stand, when to speak, and what to do are all dictated by others. This loss of control reinforces the reality of confinement and leaves the prisoner feeling powerless, exposed, and unsure of what will come next. One of the most difficult adjustments in the first 24 hours of incarceration is the realization that time no longer belongs to the individual. Outside prison, time is personal. People decide when to wake up, eat, rest, or move. Inside confinement, time is controlled by schedules, counts, and commands. Every action is regulated, from standing in line to sitting down, from meals to sleep. Even waiting becomes mandatory, often without explanation. Personal choice fades rapidly, replaced by obedience to routine. Simple decisions, such as when to speak, where to walk, or how long to remain in one place, are no longer self-determined. This loss creates frustration and helplessness, as the prisoner begins to understand that independence has been replaced by constant supervision. The mind struggles to adapt to a life where permission is required for even the smallest movement, reinforcing the reality that freedom of choice has been fully surrendered the moment the cell door closes is often the most unforgettable experience of the first 24 hours. The sound itself is sharp, heavy, and final, echoing not just through the hallway, but through the prisoner's mind. In that instant, reality becomes undeniable. Until this point, there may have been hope that the situation was temporary or unreal, but the closing door removes all doubt. Physical separation from the outside world becomes absolute. The walls feel closer, the air heavier, and the sense of isolation intensifies. This moment forces an emotional reckoning as freedom shifts from something recently lost to something completely unreachable. Feelings of panic, regret, fear, and disbelief surge all at once. The cell becomes more than a space. It becomes a symbol of confinement, control, and permanence. For many prisoners, this is the point where emotional defenses weaken and the weight of incarceration truly settles in. During the first 24 hours in prison, a prisoner's mind is flooded with emotions that are intense, overwhelming, and often contradictory. Anxiety sets in almost immediately, fueled by the uncertainty of the environment and the lack of control over basic aspects of life. Every sound, the clang of doors, footsteps echoing in the hallways, or distant voices, can trigger tension and hyper-awareness. Alongside anxiety comes regret, as the prisoner reflects on the choices and actions that led to this moment. Thoughts replay past decisions, relationships, and missed opportunities, creating a cycle of self-blame and sorrow. Fear is equally present and multi-layered. Fear of the unknown, fear of other inmates, fear of authority, and fear of what the future may hold. These emotions are not isolated. They intertwine and intensify one another, creating a psychological storm that can feel inescapable. The prisoner may struggle to think clearly, feeling both vulnerable and exposed as the weight of confinement presses on both mind and body. The first night in prison is often the longest and most restless. Sleep, which once came easily, becomes almost impossible in an environment filled with unfamiliar sounds, harsh lighting, and the constant movement of others. The mind, already overwhelmed by fear, anxiety, and regret, refuses to rest, replaying the day's events and imagining what lies ahead. Every creak of the floor, shout in the corridor, or clang of a metal door can startle the prisoner awake, making the concept of rest feel unattainable. The body is physically exhausted, but the mind remains alert, trapped in a heightened state of vigilance where relaxation feels unsafe. Even when lying down, the mind may race with thoughts of family, lost freedom, or potential dangers within the prison walls. The inability to sleep deepens fatigue and intensifies emotional strain, making the prisoner feel more isolated and vulnerable. Night becomes a time of heightened awareness, forcing reflection and confrontation with inner fears while the world outside continues without them. The first 24 hours in prison are not only physically confining, but mentally unavoidable, creating a space where introspection is almost impossible to escape. Stripped of distractions, routine, and the familiar comforts of daily life, a prisoner is left alone with their thoughts. This sudden isolation forces a confrontation with one's past choices, behaviors, and the circumstances that led to incarceration. Memories, regrets, and personal failures surface with startling clarity, and there is little opportunity to suppress or ignore them. The mind begins to ask difficult questions. Who am I now? What could I have done differently? What does this moment say about my life and my future? These reflections can be both painful and illuminating, prompting the individual to face uncomfortable truths about themselves. Without the ability to escape into activity, entertainment, or social interaction, the prisoner experiences an intense psychological pressure that encourages honest self-examination. Even fleeting thoughts of hope, guilt, or fear become magnified, shaping the prisoner's understanding of themselves and the consequences of their actions. While the initial hours of imprisonment are overwhelmingly filled with fear, confusion, and loss, they can also serve as a turning point in a prisoner's life. Stripped of freedom, removed from familiar environments, and forced into reflection, the individual has no choice but to confront the consequences of their actions. This confrontation can spark the first awareness of personal responsibility, as the reality of one's decisions becomes undeniable. For some, this moment ignites a desire to make changes, small steps at first, like understanding rules, controlling emotions, or planning how to adapt to the environment. The harshness of confinement can act as a mirror, reflecting patterns of behavior, choices, and attitudes that may have previously gone unexamined. In this way, the first 24 hours are more than punishment. They are an intense, unrelenting opportunity for self-awareness. The prisoner begins to see not only what led to their confinement, but also the possibilities for personal growth, behavioral change, and a different approach to life, if they're willing to face the challenges head-on. In conclusion, the first 24 hours of imprisonment are a profound journey from freedom to confinement. They are filled with shock, fear, and loss, yet also with reflection, awareness, and the potential for change. While the experience is undeniably harsh, it serves as a powerful reminder of the value of freedom, the weight of our choices, and the resilience of the human spirit. These initial hours may be the most difficult, but they can also be the first step toward understanding, accountability, and transformation.